Atheists such as Daniel Dennett say that parents teaching their children their faith in God is child abuse. Yes, taking advantage of the fact that children have not yet learned to think rationally is definitely child abuse. Teaching children about religion in an honest, non-confessional way is not. Christianity specifically teaches people that they are evil, wicked, worthless sinners who deserve to be tortured forever. For parents to tell this to their children over and over until they become convinced that it's true is definitely a form of psychological child abuse. So is telling them that priests deserve their admiration and later their money. See, if you haven't figured it out yet, organized religion is a scam. It's a case of inventing a problem and selling the solution. You're a horrible, wretched sinner and you need forgiveness that, of course, the church, and only the church, can help you obtain. This involves letting priests, or whatever you call them, tell you what to think about various issues, and of course they'll need donations from you as well. You don't really think it all goes to charity, do you? Where do you think a priest's paycheck comes from? Of course, the poor saps will defend this by saying that the priest performs a vital function and deserves that paycheck. But that's the thing, it's only a vital function to those who believe, and in many cases, people start believing simply because they're indoctrinated while too young to even understand the concept of a scam. Look, believers are like addicts and the priests are like drug dealers. Hey, what you put in your body is none of my business as long as you don't hurt anyone. But don't give it to kids who are too young to make an informed decision about whether they want it or not. What is the logical conclusion of this atheistic agenda? Apparently it is evil child abuse for parents who believe in God to teach their children to believe in God. No, it would be child abuse to do it by taking advantage of the fact that they're children. Get it? The trick is to teach children how to think, not what to think. But that's the thing. Fundamentalists want children to have specific beliefs and automatically reject anything that conflicts with those beliefs. Once kids are conditioned that way, they're virtually incapable of even considering the possibility that they're wrong. That's robbing them of something, their ability to think for themselves. Why not let them keep it? I mean, if what you believe is true, you can just show them the evidence when they're old enough to analyze it critically. But of course we all know why that option's out now, don't we? But it is good, not child abuse, for atheists, or government-paid teachers, to inculcate atheism, disbelief in God, into all children. It's not child abuse to not indoctrinate children. And you do realize that teachers don't, or at least shouldn't, tell children not to believe in God, right? What they do, or at least should do, is not tell them to believe in God. There's a big difference there. This is the same twisted thinking that drove Stalin, Hitler, and Mao et al., and resulted in the deaths of 100 million people. Wow! Mariano, seriously? This is chapter 5, and you've only now satisfied Godwin's law. I'm impressed. But okay, didn't those people abuse children by indoctrinating them into their own ways of thinking using exactly the same methods as fundamentalists? Ever consider the kind of propaganda that they had crammed into school books? These dictators practically presented themselves as deities to be worshipped by the people even if they never actually used those words. It wasn't the lack of what a Christian fundamentalist might call a proper religion that led to the atrocities that were committed. It was the presence of extreme ideologies that are just as bad as religion at its worst. It's not what people don't believe that informs their actions. It's what they do believe. Stalin didn't send people to die in labor camps because he didn't believe in a god, but because he did believe in a particularly ruthless form of communism. And oh, Hitler wasn't an atheist. He was a Christian and explicitly said that he believed himself to be doing God's work. Nazi Germany was a Christian nation. It is not hyperbolic language to state that every one of atheism's arguments against God's existence is premised upon the atheology of the individual atheist making the argument. Stop! Atheology? Never mind. Look, there's one argument against theism. Theists have made the claim that a god exists and have yet to meet their burden of proof. That's it. Atheism's arguments against God's existence are peppered with statements such as, why would God, or why wouldn't God, or why does God, or why doesn't God, or if God was, then God would, or should, or surely could, etc. These are all theological statements because they are premised upon presupposed attributes of God. These are not arguments against God, but against belief in the God the theist defines. The purpose of these arguments is to point out logical problems that arise from the theist's claims. It's not a case of premise, therefore no God exists, but here's why the argument you just made that supposedly proves God does exist actually doesn't work. For example, if God was, then God would be omnipotent and loving. Loving means not allowing any pain, evil, or suffering, and so either God is not loving or is not omnipotent, and if God is neither loving and or omnipotent, then God is not. Various likewise examples could be concocted. What's presented here is the exact opposite of the position Mariano is actually arguing against. It's a straw man and an exceptionally bad one. Atheists generally do not believe that God must be omnipotent and all-loving if he exists. Anyone who understands the problem of evil, regardless of whether they believe in a God or not, accepts that if a God exists, then he is not omnipotent and all-loving. He can be one or neither, but not both. That would be incompatible with observable reality. Mariano says that according to atheists, if God is neither loving and or omnipotent, then God is not. No, if God is both loving and omnipotent, then God is not. Sadly for him, that's the God he believes in. Rather than seeking to instantly answer the atheist's argument, the first response should be to ask the atheists to substantiate their premise, their atheology. Following are some examples of relevant questions. How did you arrive at your atheological positions? Why should we confine our understanding of God to your atheology? Why do you define love the way you do? Why do you set restrictions on God? Why do you demand that God do as you dictate? I agree that if an atheist makes an argument against a general concept of God, then these are appropriate questions. However, I have never come across such an argument. Seriously, never. The arguments atheists present are typically arguments against specific deities defined by the theist making the claim that a certain deity exists, or by the teachings of the religion the theist represents. The atheist's arguments are in response to this claim. Again, the problem of evil is not an argument against theism, but against a God that is defined as omnipotent and perfectly good. It's not the atheist that defines God this way, but the theist who tries to convince the atheist that a God defined in such a way actually exists. Who made God? This argument, although very popular and promulgated by atheist scientists and even atheist philosophers, is a premier example of what is generally termed Sunday school atheism. It is called this because it is a Sunday school level question and one that Sunday school children are able to answer before achieving puberty. God is eternal and thus does not need a cause. Yet, asking who made God is an appropriate response to the classic cosmological argument or the argument from design. These go, somewhat simplified. Premise 1. Everything that exists has a cause/designer. Premise 2. The universe exists. Conclusion. Therefore, the universe has a cause/designer. Well, then what caused or designed the cause/designer? The Sunday school answer is a valid response only if the question is asked in response to the Kalam cosmological argument, which doesn't state that everything has a cause, only everything that begins to exist. Arguments like these will be addressed next time, by the way. But is not claiming that God is eternal a mere way out of the problem of who made God? No. Since time began to exist, time had a cause.
Not necessarily, and even if it did, that wouldn't mean that the cause has to be a god. But we'll get into that next time.
Note, however, that atheists have no problem believing in an uncaused first cause, at least when it's not supernatural, but nature, as they promulgate the following assertions.
Oh, this should be fun.
It is ignorant and superstitious to believe that God made everything out of nothing.
Since there's no evidence supporting that, or even that a god exists, yeah.
It is rational and scientific to believe that nothing made everything out of nothing.
Not necessarily.
It would depend on the definition of nothing, but if nothing means the absence of everything that could possibly affect anything at all, then it certainly wouldn't be rational or scientific, and no one argues otherwise. It is ignorant and superstitious to believe that God is eternal.
No, not any more than believing that unicorns have horns. What's ignorant and superstitious is believing that unicorns actually exist.
It is rational and scientific to believe that matter or energy is eternal.
That's a tough one to answer quickly. I'll put it like this.
It's rational and scientific to believe that something always existed, though that something may actually be what physicists refer to as nothing. Again, it would depend on what definitions you use. For the sake of clarity, I will define the term nothing as the complete absence of absolutely everything, including abstract concepts such as natural laws, as I believe this is what Mariano means. Anyway, the reasoning goes, nothing lacks the ability to act upon anything in any way. It follows from the definition of nothing. Therefore, nothing cannot affect nothing. Therefore, nothing cannot turn nothing into something. Something exists. Conclusion, therefore, something has always existed. God is an effect and must have had a cause. If you define God as something that exists and assert that everything that exists has a cause, then you are the one implying that God must have had a cause. Otherwise, this is indeed an unfounded assertion and no one says otherwise. Matter/energy is the uncaused first cause.
Also unfounded, but who says this? Source, please.
If God made everything, then who made God? Again, if you define God as something that exists and assert that everything that exists has been made by something, then you are the one implying that God must have a maker. Otherwise, I'll agree that the question makes no sense. Matter made everything and nothing made matter.
Again, who says this? Source, please.
This whole chapter is a big fat attempt to shift the burden of proof. Look, even if atheists were to make fallacious or unsound arguments against the existence of a general God, pointing out the problems with those arguments wouldn't be enough. The theist still hasn't shown that a God does exist, and that's the only way to justify theism. I'd advise against trying to disprove generic gods. There's really no point. The theist can always counter with, sure, but that's not the God I believe in. The only gods that can be known not to exist are those that are defined in ways that are either internally inconsistent or incompatible with observable reality.
Only fundies believe in gods like that. Moderates tend to keep their gods unfalsifiable. You know, that's actually the best case for the existence of a god that can be made. One that can be dismissed right away as completely irrelevant.